Like sand through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives.
Welcome into the emergency podcast edition of the Growler. Paul Daner Jr., Charlie Goldsmith here on an evening where it finally happens, Charlie. Like sands through the hourglass, even soap operas come to an end. Trey Hendrickson soap opera with the Bengals finally comes to an end. How are you feeling? Is there a sense of relief for you, Charlie?
These shows, like Days of Our Lives, like more your generation than mine, I believe what they would do is it'd be like a double episode that they'd use to fill up like the full hour. That's what they would do, and it would be some big resolution or plot twist in a good way, like the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson got today. That's what they do.
You know what they do, and what I think they kind of did here? You wake up, and it was all a dream. It didn't really happen. This was never about a multi-year extension. Turns out it was just about him playing out the same contract that he's been on, just revised. That's all it was. It was all a dream, Charlie. The news, for those of you that don't know, is Trey Hendrickson has signed a revised contract with the Cincinnati Bengals. It is not an extension. There are no years added to this deal. It is essentially a $14 million raise, taking him up to $30 million for this season. The two sides could not come close to a deal in terms of the years, guarantees, money on anything multi-year. So it was, look, Trey, play out this year, and then you become a free agent in 2026 and hit the market. There's a lot to unpack with this. And so there's a number of things I want to make sure that we tick on here. I want to tick on the franchise tag element of this. I want to tick on the comp pick element of this. I want to talk about leverage in the 2023 extension rearing its ugly head once again here for Trey Hendrickson, and what it means for the 2025 Bengals. All of that I want us to kind of get through and unpack. But first, what to you, Charlie, is the number one main takeaway of this deal and where the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson surprisingly kind of ended up here at the end?
It's a cliche, like another year where we do the whole all-in thing. Like they went all in with Jesse Bates. They went all in with T. Higgins. And I know it's a cliche. But the only way this deal works out for either side is if Trey Hendrickson is sacking the top quarterbacks in the league and helping the Bengals win playoff games. It takes both of those things on both sides for this, again, to be a success for either side. For Hendrickson, who needs to follow up the career year that he had from a sack production last year. And it's the case for a Bengals team that way more than anyone, during this last 6-year run, the possibility to trade Trey seemed a lot realer than it did T or Jesse or any of those guys like that. And the fact that they didn't, in the way they invested in 25, counting on the production, even though that comes with some risk and what Hendrickson's going to be this season. If it doesn't work out on either end, someone's going to come home feeling very disappointed. If it works out on both ends, you kind of shake hands at the end of the day and wish each other luck heading into 2026.
I go back to, I just don't think the Bengals ever really had interest in doing a long-term deal here. Mm-hmm. They just never really did. I think everyone wanted them to. I think they wanted it to appear that they did. Trey Hendrickson wanted one, but we've detailed from the very beginning here, the age factor was significant in the building. Okay. The fact that he's not a quote complete player was significant in the building. The fact that their defense stunk last year, even though he was great, said a lot, I think, as well. The bottom line is I think they loved the idea of Trey Hendrickson in 2025, and anything beyond that just made them too nervous to really invest in. That's why you ended up with no guarantees in year 2 and all the things that Trey was getting mad about that he wasn't getting that other players have gotten. Our reporting here at The Athletic that I have, I think speaks to this louder than anything that I can say. And that is the 3 years, 95, that was essentially what was left on the table. The source says that it was breakdown of that was $33 million for this year, 23 million in year 2. Hold on to that number for a second. And then 39 in year 3, essentially funny money at that point when you're talking about year 3, no guarantees, all of that. I mean, the idea of going 33-23 for a guy that was the runner-up for defensive player of the year and leads the league in sacks. I mean, all of that stuff. That is a team that spoke with actions and with offers that said, we're not interested in Trey Hendrickson beyond 2025. We're just not, and not going to put any guaranteed money or anything that we really can't get out of on for that. And I think that was the way they felt about it. And that's exactly where this thing ended.
If you've listened to the show, you know Paul and I's individual thoughts on the idea of giving Trey a long-term multi-year deal. And we've talked about the flaws in Trey's game and all of that. The sense I get, that's obviously how the Bengals felt. That's kind of what the league recognized as well. So if you're from a Bengals perspective, looking at Trey and valuing Trey on a more limited basis than the top edge rushers in the league are, that's how you get to a situation where one, you're stuck when you get to this point, and two, you're limited now from a long-term perspective because you don't have a multi-year window with Hendrickson. You don't have the long-term value of what a trade could have gotten you in return. Again, like it's almost like a very limited upside deal for both sides in this category. Like the Bengals paid $14 million for Trey to be happy this year, and Trey didn't get what he wanted, which was the long-term guarantees. So you're just, again, kind of stuck, and you avoid the drama, you avoid the disaster, but it was just a full of reminders of how the Bengals view Trey, how the league viewed Trey, how you probably should have traded Trey in March, but now it's August, you're stuck. It's the end of August, and the best you can do is say, let's try to make something out of this year from a contractual standpoint to try to make both sides as happy as they could. I don't love it, but it was the best they could do right now.
I mean, think what you could have done with $30 million in free agency. You know, I mean, it's like when you consider where the roster sits right now with holes all over the place and this, that, and the other. Let's get into some of the logistics of this. You know, the franchise tag element of this pops up. Okay, well, what if he doesn't hit free agency next year? What if he has a great year and the Bengals say, man, had a great year. Let's do it up again. Let's do the tag business. First of all, Trey might kill someone. Like, I mean, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. Like, that would be the biggest affront and the most frustrating thing that could possibly happen for Trey Hendrickson. Now, it would mean a lot of money for him, much more than he was apparently offered in year 2 of this deal. Franchise tags get confusing without going too deep into the weeds. It is going to be based off of his cap number theoretically, which if it's 30 or 30 and some change, depending on how the actual details of the contract get worked out, would put you in the 36 up between 36 and $40 million range for 1 year. That's not something the Bengals are likely to do. I can't imagine that. If we just got done telling you what their offers and everything have been in terms of how they feel about him beyond 2025, the idea of them then giving that much money guaranteed is highly unlikely. One other element to this to remember is that the old timers here, none of you Joe Burrow new fans don't know about this, but Andrew Whitworth left, and there's a rule called the 30 and 10 rule. And in the 30 and 10 rule, if you're 30 with 10 years accrued, your compensation in terms of a comp pick can't be higher than a fifth. So you would only get, if Trey Hendrickson stuck around after 2026, he left, and they would, their compensation, the best they could do would be a fifth. But if he leaves in March, they can get the normal compensatory pick, which would be a third probably, or a fourth, depending on what it ends up being. A big difference when you talk about what you're getting back when and if Trey ends up leaving in free agency.
Unless, what was the Jesse Bates comp pick, McKinley Jackson, who's now out here running in the third quarter of the pre. The point is, there's still only half a defense here. And long-term problems still haven't been solved at defensive end. Short-term problems still exist for the Bengals What Trey Hendrickson's going to be this season for the Bengals remains a question. Again, it was kind of thing like where I don't feel like anything even really changed today, except for, of course, Trey Hendrickson gets a $14 million raise, and I hope he feels a lot of happiness and satisfaction with that. But none of the Bengals' short or long-term concerns looking at the roster as a whole and then managing that defense got any better with this deal.
Trey is apparently happy. So he did speak to the team website for this and said, look, for this season to be, this is his quote to the team website, for this season to be given a raise, I didn't necessarily had to be given. It's a blessing to be in a position where I've been brought up to my peers and also being able to get after quarterbacks. I love this city, and with what's been happening the last couple of months, I've had time to reflect on what it means to me and how much I want to stay a Bengal for the 2025 season. And reports I've heard from, people around Trey and inside the building is that, it seems to be there's genuine happiness and excitement from Trey Hendrickson about doing this. There's no, signing begrudgingly against his will. I will say this. I expect a fully pissed off lunatic coming off the edge this year. I mean, he is in a contract year now. He's already blackout Trey. So you already kind of know what that looks like. But now he's out here yet again, having to go prove his worth, going after the quarterback and build his worth for next year. And, prove the haters wrong. Nothing motivates more than proving the haters wrong. And he's going to have all of that to do, plus all of the money that he's going to be playing for yet again for whatever his March contract is going to look like. That's the win-win for the Bengals is happy and motivated. We've talked a lot about that, the old line about, how do they deal with the distractions of all these players and their holdouts? I don't know. Those players seem to consistently play pretty well. It's happened over and over again. Jamar Chase won the Triple Crown last year. Not too shabby for a guy who supposedly was so disgruntled and mad. Like, these things can be just fine in terms of this year. But you're right, Charlie. It's a Band-Aid fix on something that feels like it needed a lot more than a Band-Aid.
There's also a couple sides to what you're saying as well. Like, you do save yourself from the headache of the next 2 weeks of having like the game plan with Trey and the game plan without Trey and playing the hack game for the next 2 weeks. And that did have a real impact when you look at Jamar Chase last season. But you also weren't willing to go into future years to mitigate that headache or whatever. You get the point I'm saying there. Trey Hendrickson has to significantly play better in 2025 than he did in 2024, even to on the free agent market next spring, get the deal that he's looking for in terms of the multi-year guarantees. Like, I don't even think that the trade market really even took off in the way that clearly the Bengals were hoping for, but in a way that you would expect for someone who's an all-pro. And that's a sign, again, of how much Trey has to really, truly prove. He's now a 31-year-old with something to prove, having to be significantly better in some specific areas than he even was in this career season that he had last year. I do want to say one more thing, though. Like, I've had a bit of a critical tone. I will say this, though. Like, how many times has someone said to the Blackburns and the Browns, I request a trade or I would like a raise, and they get like patted on the back, like, thanks, but see you later. Well, the Bengals did do right by Trey, might be too strong, but they did do Trey a solid here. They didn't say just go play on your deal and be happy. There was at least a bit of negotiation that wasn't necessarily necessary from their side. They did give in a little more than I am used to seeing from the Bengals in terms of these modern, Burrow era negotiations. It's not like they said Trey will see in week 3. They were a bit more proactive than they've been in some of these other cases.
Yeah. And there's a couple of risk factors with this. I mean, obviously Trey's age, being older, it felt like this was the year that he had to just figure out whatever the most he could cash in would be. And I think he did that. I think sure, this was the most money he could guarantee to himself that he could cash in on, was just get 30 right now and hope. And in terms of the spot that he was in, it's a huge risk to try to hit the market next year when you're a year older and you already have that coming your way, especially if he comes out and has 9 sacks, even like 10 or 11 sacks, 12. And it just doesn't look quite the same. you're going to have a hard time hitting the market. The risk on the Bengals part is obvious here. They still don't have answers for the long term. They hope Shamar Stewart is an answer. They maybe still hope that Miles Murphy's part of an answer. They hope that next year's draft can be part of an answer. They hope that next year in free agency could maybe be part of an answer. But we've seen how it's gone before with hope. And they may think, and I have thought that there's more hope in investing in young players than investing in whatever the 2026 and 2027 seasons of Trey Hendrickson is going to be. I think that's true. But the fact that there's been such a failure to develop, and they do have guys that have not proven it yet anywhere, including this year's first-round pick who had 4.5 sacks at Texas A&M, is a massive risk for the long term of such an important position. It does give them time, though. It buys them a year. It buys them a year seeing those guys, and it buys them time next year with space and money that they can use next year. Maybe money that they could have used this year and just cut the tie a little cleaner, but instead they go for it this year with Trey one more time.
A key part of this, too, is that, like, while Trey has his limitations, like, what is 2027 Trey Hendrickson versus 2027, let's say, like, Miles Murphy? Like, who's going to have a better season in 2027? It's kind of an interesting, fun little question. That uncertainty was not the plan when you drafted Murphy initially to be the Hendrickson replacement, and then you drafted Stewart to redo the Hendrickson replacement strategy. But ideally, you'd still have him and Stewart on the edge. But behind them, the cupboard's pretty barren with Osai on a 1-year deal, with Sample on a 1-year deal, with Sed Johnson being a 6th-round pick who hasn't established much. It's kind of like the reverse T. Higgins equation too, where, all right, T was gone, but then they had no one to pay, so they kept T. And I don't think they'll circle back with Trey in that way. But you'd like to be at a point in February where you're preparing to use that money you're now not using on Trey Hendrickson, on Dax Hill, on Cam Taylor-Britt. Heck, I believe Miles Murphy even would be extension eligible at the end of the season. It's funny how time flies. Ideally, you have more long-term value with the young players you've invested to be your future in those seasons, and you're not regretting not having a 32-year-old being a part of your future in those seasons. But it's a fine line right now because of how little their draft picks have established.
Man, how much must he regret signing that 2023 extension? It's just, It has bit him over and over and over again.
It all comes back to that.
It does. That was the moment where the Bengals gained all the leverage. He handed it over to them in exchange for $5 million, right, in an extra year. Like he did. He said, fine, I'll take it just to get the money and feel like it, rather than just do the clean bet on yourself, it changed everything. And, from a Bengals perspective, a shrewd move. They have been shrewd with every step of Trey Hendrickson's way. Now, he may be unhappy, and we've talked about the ramifications of what that's meant in the locker room, but financially, look at what they've gotten out of Trey Hendrickson. They were early in on him in the first place, and it turned into one of the best bargain free agent deals they did. They were super smart to get him to the extension that changed everything from this point forward. And then now they get a guy of what he has been it's going to max out this year at this 30 number, but you consider what it was before and the average over the time of the entire contract. They have been shrewd at every point of this financially, and Trey has had to kind of grin and bear it a little bit. And so much of it comes back to that day where he signed in 23.
I have a question for you. So in February, we're at that point. All right, this offseason, you got to get Jamar done. You got to get T done. You got to get Trey done. And of course, they got something done with Trey. And then definitely success on Jamar and T. Did they accomplish the big stuff they had to get done this all the little stuff we'll be talking about tomorrow on the waiver wire, the 53-man roster cut deadline because of all the positions they don't have. But do you give them enough credit for the big stuff they did this offseason, or does the 1-year nature of Trey and just the kind of kicking the can down the road that's going on building this defense kind of not give them full credit for that?
I think the little stuff piled up to be big stuff. I thought they got the big stuff right enough, but because they didn't get it all the way there and missed on so many of the little things, I don't know. Yeah, they checked the big boxes. Literally every box that Joe Burrow drew on the board, they put a check mark in. And they did. And Joe Burrow is going to go out there with the team that he asked for in Cleveland. And that's something. I mean, that is, and I don't think a lot of people thought that they could do that. And in fact, a lot of people shouted into microphones on national television programs a lot that they couldn't do it and that they'd be cheap and all that other stuff. That said, the boxes they didn't check, being so concerned about the big boxes, or maybe being unwilling to make the decisive proactive move with Hendrickson, allowed everything else to pile up. It doesn't change that right now. I think you feel really good about where they're at for 2025. It could have been done better. And I think the fact that it could have been done better, even in the way they did it, is what leaves it feel a little unfulfilling, considering you're staring at all those checked boxes.
And like one of the things you always hear, like not from other GMs, not from the Bengals front office, get the deals done early, use the flexibility, maximize the flexibility you get, kick the can down the road, build for a window you have now. And with the receivers deals, and then Hendrickson's another example, they're not going to be able to see any benefit in the short term of having this extension number on their books and being able to manage the cap in a specific way. The fact that they get none of the benefits of getting their work done leads to concerns that we'll probably be discussing a lot tomorrow as we discuss, who the heck's this team's safety for going to be. And as we discuss how the Bengals missed out and should have traded for Fred Johnson. Because it's these two halves of the roster now. It's the superstars they have that technically, I guess, they were successful with. But with Trey in particular, not T, because you build around T going into the long term. And I think T's going to have a better 25 than Trey will. But what you're missing now in 2025 and where that could have come from.
I mean, let's take Trey right now. Would you rather have Trey Hendrickson, or would you rather have $30 million that you spent appropriately in free agency and a second-round pick? I think they could have probably gotten something like that back in March, just by clearing the books and taking a second-round pick. And think about what that could have looked like for your defense. I mean, that's me. That's my take on it.
Especially when you could also talk yourself into all right, clearly we didn't believe this, but get a long-term deal done with Trey, sign him, guarantees through 2027. We believe that Trey Hendrickson is going to be an all-pro defensive end for the next 5 years. I wouldn't agree with that, but you know what? Sure. Okay. That's a plan. That's a vision. That's an idea that helps you in the short and long term. But the way the Hendrickson stuff concluded is just so short term. And again, to use the cliche all in, but it kind of is for a team that missed out on some other chances to build short and long term. Like adding a free safety would have been a short and long term move that could have impacted the defense, for example, in a similar way. And that leads to a roster that's very top heavy heading into the season.
Yep. Charlie and I'll be back tomorrow. So we'll have plenty. If we have more thoughts on this, we'll be sure to share them. Bengals did some cuts today, kind of the back 12 of the roster cut. Nothing super surprising. Tomorrow we'll get all the way down. We'll know more about who's available. The waiver wire will start to churn all the way through Wednesday and beyond, really, but specifically through Wednesday. So a lot of things will happen in the always fluid NFL rosters this time of year. We will be back after we talk to Zach Taylor, and the final cuts are announced tomorrow evening. So make sure you check back in there. All of that leading up to as we get going down towards the season. Of course, our live show at BetMGM, Tom's Watch Bar, is on the 4th. September 4th, leading you up. It starts at 7 o'clock, leads you right up to Cowboys and Eagles. We'll have the whole crew down there previewing the season, giving away tickets to Bengals, Jags, and a Burrow jersey, and all kinds of special stuff we've got going on. So we hope to see you all down there. It's one of our favorite nights of the year. It will be a blast. All right, Charlie, thanks for hopping in. I think this is your first emergency pod with me. Yeah, I know. Sound the alarm on that. Hopefully the first of many. And I'll talk to you tomorrow, Charlie. So have a good one, everybody.